Hi, this is the Black Bear Prepper, and what we're going to be talking about is more about our scouting segment, but I think this is a segment for everybody. We're going to talk about sharpening tools. I think it's a skill that all preppers should have, all people should have, and especially scouts. Learning how to sharpen knives and bring them back to cutting. Now, the reason I say cutting versus dull or sharp, I don't want to get into sharp and dull as much as I want to talk into cutting and doesn't cut. So why would a knife not cut? What would cause a knife to be to the point of where it would not cut something? Now, that would be, there's a couple reasons for that. One, you can have a blade that has actually become dull. The actual tip of the blade, so if we're picturing my hands as points, and it comes to a fine point at the top, it's actually been rounded off. Okay, so it's actually got too far rounded off. Or the blade could be rounded over, where the actual tip of the blade has been bent over, and we can straighten it back out sometimes. Then we have issues with too steep of an angle, where the angle is so steep that it's like pushing through like an axe versus a knife, where it's a real fine angle. And then we have grit that is actually too, we're talking like 50 grit instead of 2000 grit, where the actual grit of the blade makes it more into this kind of really jagged edge that just doesn't cut, it kind of more tears through things, like a shark tooth style idea. So what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about sharpeners in general. We're also going to talk about my way of sharpening and kind of some things I like that will help with the sharpening of anything. But we're going to start with bigger tools. Now, hopefully, you were at our class last month, at our roundtable last month, and you saw a lot of this go on that we were able to go into more depth. We're not going to have a 3-hour video here. And this is to give kind of some of my background. I've been a professional knife sharpener for about 15 years. I've done it lots of different ways. This is some of the stuff that I think is purchasable at home. There's lots of different sharpening systems that work really well out there. I tend to stay away from items that use power tools. The reason is because speed, sparks coming off the tools, they actually hinder, you'll actually lose the temper on your blade and the blades won't stay sharpening long, after a certain period of time. So starting out, large tools, axes. Things that we use to sharpen axes. This is a puck, a sharpening puck. It has a smooth side on one side and a grittier side on the other. These are great for kind of getting things back to, and if this is my blade, I'm actually going to push it and kind of round it off. And I'm going to try to keep with the angle of that all the way through. So kind of a good idea. And then once I've got it down to a reasonable point, kind of, come over the top. Now this one's made by Lansky. If you like this type of sharpener, that's fine. I tend not to like these. I think they take forever. So I use a couple different tools, and this is for anything that's like an axe. So machetes, axes, anything that's going to be like a chopping type implement or a whack and hack tool, we call them. I really like this particular one. This is what I use, which is a file. Now this is a chrome file. This is a heavy duty file. You can sometimes buy these from shops that do snowboard. This is where I got mine from, we used to sharpen snowboards. So this is one of the ones that I used for that. And when they get too dull for that, I use them for sharpening saws. And so you can sharpen a saw, you can sharpen a axe, all that kind of thing. And this is going to do the rough cutting. Again, we're cutting away from ourselves, we're pushing away. Files only work in one direction, so you're not meant to do this direction. You're meant to be a pushing direction. Okay? And then as I'm finishing it off, I finish it off. This is a smooth and fine side diamond stone. You can get these on eBay for like $6. And they really do work well, and they do a fairly decent job onto something that's like that. And again, it's a push all the way through until you've got a decent edge on them. Axes, we have two different kinds of axes. We're going to talk about angle here in a second, but we really want to make sure that we're kind of mimicking the angle that was already on the axe when we started. What we don't want to have happen is that you take a splitting axe which has a really steep angle for splitting wood apart and make it into an axe for chopping. There's two different types of axes out there, chopping axe and splitting axe. We want to make sure we keep it in that idea of right around that area of that same angle. So we will talk about how to find that same angle here in a second. So for heavy duty tools, this is kind of what I prefer, the file and the diamond stone. If you have one of these pucks at home, they work just fine. They're great. When we get into sharpening, we want to talk a little bit about, like I was saying, we basically have things that have been, we have your blade of your knife that's like this piece of paper here where it's nice and sharp. We have it where it's been rounded off, where it's actually been dulled, and it's going to look more like this where there's no actual sharp edge. And then we have a rounded, one that's actually been curved over, and that's from actual use. That's usually cutting boards cause that. And we do a lot of cutting in scouts, as much as we all think we're just going to hack up trees and things like that. Most of the time we're using our knives for cutting food. So cutting boards are really a problem. So biggest thing that causes, we're going to talk kind of about each one of these. So starting is an edge that has been rounded over. It's sharp, but it's rounded over. And if it's rounded over like that, we can use a honing steel. Honing steels, is you'll see these in butcher blocks all the time. And what you're actually going to do with it is we're going to run, and I know we're using a piece of paper, of course, but we're going to run our knife on it backwards to bring the edge back out. And we'll do it in these terms here. I'm going to actually bring it, I'm going to try to mimic the angle that was already on the knife. We're going to bring that angle back out. And then we're going to come towards ourselves. Now, if you guys don't feel proper doing that, you can always go down at this angle. And we're trying to do the same angle as what was already on the knife. Does it have to be perfect? No, but it has to be at least greater than the angle of the knife. So if the knife is at a 20-degree angle, we want to do at least 21 degrees, so we're actually getting to the tip. So something in these terms like this. Now I actually cut back towards ourselves, and if that's the way you do it, that's fine too. We want to do the same number of strokes on each side, and that's actually going to bring that straight, that curved over edge, which has been rounded over, back up straight, and get us back to our edge here, our sharp edge. And I'm using that piece of paper to kind of demonstrate that. Now, we have a couple other items. There's some simple items that I recommend you kind of have in your pack or one in your truck. Like if we've rounded off an edge, like we've used, maybe let's say we've got a problem where we've cut into bone or something like that, and we've actually flattened out our edge. We've actually worn it out. Or we've just cut so many boxes or whatever it is that we've actually worn that edge, so it's now round instead of pointed, where it actually doesn't meet anymore. At that point, there's a couple cool tools out there. I really like these. Both these items work really good. This is sharpeners that are made, this one's made by Smith, this one's made by Lansky. I like the Lansky one a little better, a little easier to use. But they have dual sides. And so, if we can kind of zoom in here, you have a angle that is already mimicked in there. They're usually about 20 degrees. Most of your knives out there with a 20-degree angle would work just fine. Your European knives, contact the manufacturer of your knife. That's usually the easiest way to find out the angle. So kind of keep that in mind. So use the angle that the company recommends. And this actually has carbon blades in there. They'll actually take chunks of steel out at a time. So if you've done it up really bad, and you actually need to do that, you can actually come in and actually cut through there and actually take little chunks and get you a knife edge. Again, back to what we're doing is taking that rounded over edge and taking off enough material on each side until it mimics and pushes it into the center. We basically take off each end until it meets in the center. Okay? Now, once we've done that, and we can tell that by a couple different ways. There's a couple easy ways to do it. I call it the thumbnail test, and you can use all different kinds of things. You don't have to use your thumbnail, but I use my thumbnail, and once the items have met perfectly together, So they've basically made that, they've touched on both sides. So now we have an edge that is actually sharp at the top. The way we'll know that is a couple different ways. One, if we're not sure, what will happen is that if I put it on my thumbnail all the way down the blade, it doesn't skip off. So if we use the back side of the blade, you can see I can't stop it from skipping. It will just skip right off the knife. But if I do this side, every single time I hit it, it's going to stop right at that spot. And that means it's actually come all the way together. So that's a first kind of a good idea to start with. Once we've done that, we can flip the knife over and do some honing. It'll have ceramic stones on the other side. And we actually just pull it through and hone the knife as need be. Great tools, highly recommend them. They're awesome. I love that kind of a situation. Next we have our stones. This is kind of this is a Japanese water stone. These stones have to be soaked in water. Contact the manufacturer. These are not cheap stones. I mean, you can get these stones, a nice dual stone like this is going to cost you 40 bucks. They come from Japan. They don't have directions that are written in English. So you kind of have to know them, but you want to soak them overnight, some stones. Some stones they'll call splash stones, where they're meant to be splashed on. The company you're purchasing them from should be able to tell you whether it's a water stone, an oil stone, or a splash stone. Japanese water stones are very great. They cut really fast, they sharpen really fast. They're hard though, because what we're trying to do now at this point is then hold the angle the way we want. And the way we're using those is to sit there and actually cut with keeping pressure all the way down the knife, the same amount. The problem with that is it's hard as you're coming through here to keep that angle the same. And the angle is the trick when we're dealing with knives. We want to sit there and kind of learn about different knives. If you've got a decent knife, knives should be expensive. Most of your knives out there are in the 20, so they're 20 degrees on each side, or a 40-degree angle, or a knife that is a 25 on each side and it's a 50-degree angle. So something in those terms. This knife happens to be a 20-degree knife, so the actual angle of the knife is at 20 degrees. So we'll have what we call, there's lots of different bevels out there, but most of them will have basically two bevels. So you'll have a bevel, you'll have your main bevel, if I can show you this on here. So you'll have the main bevel, which is really sharp. That's the actual knife itself. And then you'll have a secondary bevel that's down the side that will come up to your tip. And we'll talk about a little bit more about that in a second. So we want to keep that angle the same. So it's very hard to do it on these stones here, but a trick I always use is what we always do everything in threes. So we start at 90 degrees, we go to 45 degrees, and half of that is 22.5 degrees. 22.5 degrees is kind of where, if you don't know where the angle of your knife is, if you sharpen it at 22.5 degrees on these stones like this, it's pretty good. You're going to get a decent cut all the way through, and that's a good starting angle to be at. Okay? Now other stones, like this particular one has, like I said, it has a dual side, so it has a gritty side and a smooth side. This happens to be a 200 grit and 1,000 grit stones. The more stones you can have to get to your end stone works really well. This is one, you can buy these at like Harbor Freight for about 15 bucks. This is a quad stone. It has 4 different sides on it and has the actual, way of doing that. That's kind of a neat idea to actually sharpen. And these are done by diamond stones. And again, diamond stones cut very fast, but you can't really get a diamond stone up into the 2,000-3,000 grit range, which is where we want to be. So keep in mind, when we're teaching it to scouts, we want to do the 90, 45, 22.5. And if they keep that angle as they're going on both sides, that's going to give them a fairly sharp knife. Now, I don't particularly care for that type of a system. I like a system that has a guide on it. And what that allows us to do is, if we have, like with this particular system here, I can take a guide rod with a stone already on it, I can slide it in, and as I work back and forth, the angle stays the same all the way through. And then I can flip it over, and I can work the other side, and we can get an angle all the way through the same way. Now the one problem with these is, and I'm going to show you here in a second, I'll teach you how to put the knife in the stone. We're going to put the knife in the stone. We're going to tighten down the first knob first, and this goes with all these different systems. They're all pretty much the same. So you'll tighten down the front and then the rear screw. Now the problem is you get all these numbers that are written on the actual tool. And these are reference numbers that if the blade was exactly the same spot every single time, you could use those numbers to actually get you your proper number. What I use is I put it in my tool here. I know that this particular knife happens to be a 22-degree angle. Now if I put it at 22 degrees and I put the tool on there, what I can do is I can set it here and I level the tool. I use an angle finder and I can set it on there to get my angle. And it will tell me what the angle actually is. So if I sit there and I look at it right now, I'm seeing right now I've actually almost got a 30-degree angle. It's about 28 degrees. So even though it says 22 degrees on the knife, it does matter on how close the knife is to the actual tool. As I get farther and farther out with thicker blades, that will become closer. But I want to kind of keep an eye on that and check it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep moving down. I'm going to keep moving down until I can find a little closer to where I want to be. That's about 25 degrees. Now this particular one, we have the problem with, now we're actually going to run into the tool. So that's where sometimes when it comes to these type knives, I'll put the one that actually came with it. This is the Lansky stock system, and I can put this one, and this allows me to get much more of a sharper angle on smaller knives until I can get into that really small. And that happens to be, that particular one right there is 20 degrees. So we're able to do that, and I'll show you that here. So kind of have the 20-degree mark there. So definitely a tool if you're going to use one of these systems, because the system does not allow you to really have a perfect angle off the numbers it gives you. I like this particular system. This is a Catco knife sharpener that I use with the Lansky holder. So we're going to kind of show you what I'm going to do here. I'm actually going to, since we're just showing you here, we're actually going to put it at the 22-degree mark here because we've already got the knife all in there. And I'm going to actually sit there and I'm going to rail all the way to the tip. But the thing I'm not going to do is I'm not going to go past the tip. I want to stay right on there. Now this happens to be my extra coarse diamond stone. You really want to have your stones, multiple stones. This is a set that I use here that uses about 10 different stones. So I have my coarse stones, and then I get into my standard stones here that are more of a grit type of, right around the 600 grit. Then we'll go into ceramic stone.